We've been talking about the Dakota Access Pipeline, where protesters have been clashing not only with police, but with other law enforcement agencies as well, over the construction of this 1,170-mile pipeline in North Dakota. About 40 miles south of Bismarck is where the majority of the protesters have been, and this involves the Standing Rock Sioux and other Native American tribes. The concerns are concerns that make a lot of sense to me, right? Fears that the pollution of the Missouri River from this pipeline would be a significant and negative thing, that sacred cultural lands. Think about that. We've given Native American tribes these very specifically carved out areas, and then all of a sudden fossil fuels wants to come in and go through some of those small areas that we've designated from people whose country we took away from them. And I know country is not the exact right word. We're talking about land, not necessarily an organized country or nation state as we talk about it today. But I think you get the idea. The big news is that there are now 2,000 veterans planning to gather next week at the reservation to serve as human shields for protesters. Now, why would the protesters need human shields? Well, because of everything we've seen happening to them. Water cannons with cold water in sub-zero temperatures, rubber bullets, hundreds of people being taken to local hospitals, assault and intimidation at the hands of increasingly militarized police forces. Michael Wood Jr. is the founder of the veterans group, the veterans event, rather, that is going to be doing this. He's a former guest on the show, former Baltimore police officer. Really interesting interview with him that you can check out. And Wood said he was hoping to attract 5,000 veterans, and he had to cut it off when they reached 2,000 veterans because it was just getting too big to even manage in a sort of practical way. Over $500,000 in pledges as of yesterday to pay for food and transportation and supplies, etc. And authorities, meanwhile, guys, are saying we may start fining people to block supplies from getting in. We heard from the governor, Jack Dalrymple, that there's a mandatory evacuation order saying it's because of anticipated harsh weather conditions. But of course, many people very suspicious of that because they've been trying to figure out a way to get these protesters out for a very, very long time. So this is continuing to escalate. And I know that some of us thought, not necessarily you guys, but there were thoughts among some in our audience who emailed me saying, this is going to end soon and we're just never going to hear about it again. It doesn't appear that it's going to end soon now.
Or we could just see the next stage of it. It's like that old saying where if you call the police, then I'll call the army, right?
Yeah.
And it's great to see veterans long after they've been discharged continue to serve the public because it seems like the police aren't protecting and serving us in this case.
Throughout this whole debacle, it kind of seemed that the police, the militarized and the brute force shown by the police kind of was disproportionate to the threat posed by the activists.
I'll say, yeah, no, I don't think your assessment there is wrong. Anybody looking at this, and we heard many lies also from representatives for there was a sheriff's department or a police department, I don't remember exactly, and they were critiqued for using these water cannons just on protesters in freezing cold temperatures. And they said, oh no, there weren't standalone water cannons. This was just hoses hooked up to fire trucks, and they were being used to put out fires. Now, protesters have had drones, and we played the drone footage for you last week where you could see these were not, number one, there were no fires that were being put out by some of these water cannons. And number two, they were water cannons. It was not hoses that were hooked up to fire trucks. I mean, just flat out caught lying.
And they were quite reminiscent, too, of the 1960s demonstrations where protesters had water cannons sprayed on them, and that rallied a lot of public support behind that cause.
This has been the worst of militarization of police. It's going to continue. There are lawsuits for excessive use of force. And the most troubling thing about this, what's happening to the protesters is horrible. But the most troubling thing is this is all over fossil fuels that we don't need. If we truly committed, and obviously if we had committed 15 years ago, this would be a non-issue. But even more scary is the connection between this and the Trump presidency, right? Trump is a shareholder in one of the companies that stands to make money from this pipeline. Trump plans to do massive deregulation for fossil fuel harvesting, which will make pipelines like this even more common. That to me is, I have personal concern for the protesters that are being impacted by this. But the bigger picture is that under a President Donald administration, these types of pipelines, which we should be getting away from completely, are going to be more common. And I don't know that narrative is being discussed enough, Rachel. I think that should be a more prevalent narrative.
I think it is being discussed, though, because people are talking about it in the larger context of his business holdings and partnerships, which do stand to get very sticky as we move forward.
Yeah, and we're going to be discussing that much more tomorrow. Supposed big announcements coming about Donald Trump's business holdings. But what's saddest for me, Pat, is that there's a conversation here that we've been pushing for a long time, which is, hey, you know what? We have options for energy where this doesn't even come up. Rubber bullets don't come out if you start moving towards alternative energy. Water cannons in sub-zero temperatures on protesters don't come out when you get away from fracking and pipelines and oil and natural gas and coal, et cetera. And it's I guess it's sort of there, as Rachel is saying, in one context, but the bigger picture is we've really dropped the ball on moving away from this type of energy.
Yeah, and it's a sad case for your cause that's the sort of tactics you have to use to enforce oil and put that onto people instead of greener, newer technology.
No doubt about it. So there's probably like 4 or 5 layers here. One is militarization of police. Another is the sort of total lack of respect for supposedly sacred Native American lands that were mostly handpicked by the American government. Number 3 is the broader energy implications. 4 is the Donald Trump business interests, and there's probably 5 or 6 there as well. Let's take a break. Send me your thoughts about this on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and we'll be back with more after this. Today's program is made possible in part by Movement Watches at mvmtwatches.com. I'm wearing my Movement watch today, which I love. I went with the white face and the tan band, which is a look I really like, and all the other watches I have are darker, and so I thought this would be a good fit. But they have so many different watches that are really great gifts, and now that we're getting into the holiday buying season, for me, doing the entire chaos at the mall to get a $500 watch at the department store move, that's not my move at all. But the get a $95 watch is starting at $95 at mvmtwatches.com/Pakman for some of the people in my life that I'm going to be getting gifts for. That is more my move. And you can get 15% off, as well as free shipping, as well as free returns if you go to mvmtwatches.com/Pakman. That is Pakman.